By the brutal, sun-scorched summer of 1945, the war in the Pacific was a bloody, grinding endgame. The mighty Japanese fleet, once the terror of the Pacific, was a ghost of its former self, its aircraft carriers resting in the eternal darkness at the bottom of the ocean. American B-29 superfortresses were flying with impunity over Japan's cities, unleashing a firestorm that was burning the heart out of the empire. The war was clearly, undeniably lost, but the Japanese refused to surrender. The home islands had become a fortress, a bastion of the Bushido Code, where every inch of ground was to be defended to the last man, woman, and child. For the elite American submarine fleet, the Silent Service, the hunt had become difficult and perilous. The big, glorious targets, the carriers and battleships, were mostly gone. What remained was the vital coastal shipping, the network of small freighters and transport ships that scurried along the coast, the final tenuous lifeline that kept Japan's war machine alive. But this was a dangerous game. To hunt these ships, American submarines had to venture into the shallow, treacherous and heavily mined waters right off the coast of Japan itself. It was the lion's den. The Japanese believed that here, in their own backyard, protected by dense minefields, constant air patrols and coastal artillery, they were relatively safe. The shallow waters were a submarine's nightmare, a place where it couldn't dive deep to escape, a place where it was vulnerable. They had not accounted for a US submarine named the USS Barb, and its commander a man named Eugene Fluckey. Fluckey was not a conventional submarine captain. He was an innovator, a predator, a man who saw the rulebook as merely a suggestion, and a commander with an almost insane level of audacity. His submarine, the Barb, was already a legend, having sunk more enemy tonnage than almost any other sub in the fleet. But as Fluckey prowled the coast of Japan on what would be the Barb's final war patrol, he grew frustrated. Through his periscope, he saw a nation still teeming with targets, towns, factories, and crucial supply lines. But many of these were on land, just out of reach of his torpedoes. He decided that if the targets wouldn't come to him, he would find a new way to go to the targets. Fluckey had a crazy, unprecedented idea. He had heard that the army was experimenting with small, mobile, 5-inch rocket launchers. He sent a message back to headquarters with a simple, almost laughably insane request. "Can I have some rockets for my submarine?" The Navy, baffled by the request but willing to try anything in the final push of the war, agreed. The Barb was fitted with a jury-rigged experimental rocket launcher on its main deck. It was a weapon no submarine had ever carried before. The Steel Shark now had claws. In June of 1945, the Barb crept into the waters off a Japanese coastal town. In the dead of night, it surfaced. The crew, who had only practiced with their strange new weapon a few times, aimed it towards the shore. Then they unleashed hell. A salvo of 5-inch spin-stabilized rockets screamed from the submarine's deck and slammed into the unsuspecting town, setting buildings and factories ablaze. For the Japanese defenders on the shore, it was incomprehensible. It was impossible. A submarine was not supposed to do that. They were being shelled by a ghost, a warship that fired and then vanished beneath the waves before they could even pinpoint its location. Fluckey and his crew terrorized the coast, conducting these phantom rocket attacks night after night, leaving a trail of fire and confusion. But Eugene Fluckey was still not satisfied. One night, while scanning the coast of Karafuto, a Japanese-held island, through his periscope, he saw the ultimate target. It was a target that mocked him because it was completely, utterly untouchable. It was a coastal railway line, a vital artery carrying troops and supplies to a key harbour. He watched as a long, heavily laden train thundered down the tracks. its plume of smoke a symbol of the war effort he couldn't stop. He had torpedoes, he had deck guns, he had his new rockets. None of them could reach a train. A normal, sane captain would have ignored it and moved on. Fluckey gathered his officers in the cramped control room. He looked at them and said, "We're going to attack the train." The silence in the control room was absolute. It was the single most insane idea any of them had ever heard. The captain was proposing that a submarine crew, men who lived their lives underwater, was going to conduct a commando raid on Japanese soil to blow up a train. It was a suicide mission. Fluckey began to plan with meticulous detail. He needed a demolition team, but he had no commandos, no Marines, so he asked for volunteers from his own crew. He handpicked 8 men. They were not trained saboteurs. They were electricians, torpedomen, and cooks. With a stroke of genius, he made sure to pick men who had been Boy Scouts, because he knew they would know how to use a compass and find their way in the dark. He found a man on board who had worked on a railroad before the war to advise them. Their weapon would be a 55-pound scuttling charge. The submarine's own self-destruct bomb, a device meant to sink the Barb itself to prevent its capture. On the night of July 23, 1945, the Barb surfaced silently, less than 1,000 yards from the Japanese coast, a dark shadow in the water. The 8-man demolition crew, their faces blackened with soot, their pockets filled with D-rations and automatic pistols, climbed into 2 rubber rafts and began to paddle towards the shore. Their commander, Eugene Fluckey, watched from the bridge of the sub, knowing he'd just sent his men into the heart of the enemy's fortress, a place from which they might never return. The men landed on the beach and crept through the darkness, moving like ghosts. They found the railway tracks. While some stood guard, their hearts pounding in their chests, the others frantically dug a shallow trench under the rails with their bare hands and entrenching tools to place the massive bomb. They connected the detonators. Their plan was to use a pressure switch, a simple device made from a microswitch hidden in a block of wood, so the weight of the train itself would trigger the explosion. The night exploded in an apocalyptic fireball. The 55-pound bomb detonated with incredible force, lifting the entire train off the tracks and hurling it into the air in a twisted mess of steel and fire. The locomotive's boiler exploded, sending a plume of fire and steam hundreds of feet into the sky, a magnificent, terrifying spectacle. It was a perfect, catastrophic success. On the bridge of the Barb, Fluckey and his men watched in stunned, awestruck silence. Then the Japanese shore batteries, now fully aware of their location and enraged, erupted in a frenzy, firing wildly into the darkness. Fluckey gave the order, "Take her down!" The Barb crash-dived beneath the waves, the sound of exploding shells echoing through its hull as it slipped away into the deep, leaving behind a scene of utter chaos and destruction. The men of the USS Barb had achieved the impossible. They had become the first and only American submarine crew to conduct a land-based assault on the Japanese mainland. They didn't just sink a ship, they had destroyed a train. When they returned to base, their battle flag, which was covered in the symbols of the ships they had sunk, had a new, unique, and proudly stitched addition: the silhouette of a Japanese locomotive. It was a symbol of their audacity, a testament to a crew that refused to accept any limits, and a permanent shock to an enemy who had believed they were safe in their own backyard.